Bien, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Welcome to you all. Bon dia, boneta, bonjour. Je m'appelle Francis Gingras, je suis professeur au département des littératures de langue française à l'Université de Montréal, où je m'intéresse notamment à l'histoire de la langue et à la question du statut qu'une langue peut acquérir à travers la littérature. J'ai le grand plaisir de vous accueillir à cette table ronde intitulée « Toutes les langues du monde », qui met en valeur différentes langues. Alors, je vais prendre le micro. Je pensais que ça suffisait là. Donc, différentes langues, disais-je, qui ont trouvé un droit de cité nouveau depuis quelques décennies, à côté des langues qu'on dit majoritaires. Alors, tout particulièrement le catalan, le gaélique et l'Ojibway. Alors, nous aurons l'occasion d'entendre ces différentes langues et notre conversation sera elle-même plurilingue puisque nous discuterons essentiellement en anglais, mais ferons bien sûr une place au français, notamment dans la période de questions du public où vous pourrez poser vos questions en français ou en anglais à votre convenance. Before starting the discussion, allow me to introduce you very briefly to our four panelists for this afternoon. Jorge Carrión is an author of fiction and non-fiction, notably of four dystopic novels, Los Muertos, Los Huérfanos, Los Turistas, and Los Difuntos. He writes in Castilian, but teaches creative writing at the University of Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, where both Catalan and Castilian are in use. Sean Melangel-David is a Welsh novelist and poet, author of the award-winning novel Llenyddiaeth, published in 2009. She writes in both Welsh and English, and she also teaches creative writing in an English-speaking university, but in France, at the American University of Paris, and in a Welsh university in Bangor. Lir Gwyn Lewis has taught Welsh language and literature at Swansea and Cardiff universities. He is the author of Rhyw Flodau Rhyfel, Some Flowers of War, a travel essay on war, memory, and fiction that won the 2015 Wales Book of the Year award. He also published a poetry collection, Storm on the Face of the Sun, and a short story collection entitled Fabula. Eli Baxter is an Ojibway writer who won the Governor General's Award for English Language Nonfiction in 2022 for his memoir, Aki Wezi, A Person as Worthy as the Earth, where he comes back on his experience in the Canadian residential school system. He is also a teacher, mostly of native languages and culture, especially of his mother tongue, which is Ojibway. Since we are here in Canada, in an officially bilingual country, but with the history of repression against minority languages, notably native languages, I would like to start with you, Mr. Baxter, and ask you, as an Ojibwe speaker who experienced firsthand the dangers of linguistic assimilation, but yet has kept his mother tongue alive, your thoughts on the challenges of preserving so-called minority languages and the culture they help to convey.
Eli Baxter, Zinikaza King Dunjba, Atiknatura. What I did was I introduced myself in the Ojibwe language, and later on I'll explain why there's a meaning for all of these. And I'll explain the meaning of each of these later on. But being a minority speaker, well, at one time in my book Acuenzi, we were the majority speakers here on Turtle Island. And then history came knocking on our door, and we welcome everybody that came to Turtle Island, and we eventually are find ourselves as a minority language group here in Canada, okay, which is, when you're surrounded with huge numbers, I kind of know what Custer felt back in Little Bighorn. But one of the things about being a minority language, you see the word minority, okay, puts a place and also gives a size to our Anishinaabe language, okay, because it's diminutive minority. The word minority itself is diminutive. It's small, and that's exactly what the number of speakers are right now in Ojibway, the Anishinaabe language, and also the Haudenosaunee language, which encompasses the Six Nations. But the thing is, with being a minority language, we are in trouble now as a linguistic group, because in the book Akiwenzi, I write about the loss of the language, where at one time everybody spoke it here on Turtle Island. And now, my generation, okay, we are the last speakers of the Ojibway language. And it's mostly the northern communities in northern Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, that still speak the languages. But we're getting old. We are elders. So, and right now, there isn't a program here in Canada that has fluent speakers teaching the next generation that's coming up, okay? Because after we die, the language will die. So, the problem is that, but the solution is, and I've told people about this, is that the majority governments and also the majority language groups have to help us get our languages back. Okay, and how do we do that? We work together. What is it? Because that's what we would do to, what is it? Save a drowning child, right? You know, all of us would jump in. And I think that's the only way to do that is for our for the fluent speakers to work at a university setting in all First Nations languages and all First Nations communities, and have all the people in these communities hear the language again the way that it was spoken before European contact. And my dream and my vision is to have all First Nations communities speak the language at the same level as it was spoken here on Turtle Island before European contact. Okay, so right now the education system in Ojibway and the Haudenosaunee languages and all the other First Nations languages here in Canada and the States will never work in the education field. Okay, because it's mostly learning it grammar, the grammar of it and stuff, and all that stuff. But the thing is, the way we learned it, the way I learned it, all my brothers and sisters and all my relatives, is we heard the language from our parents, and we wanted to speak like our parents and be heard like our parents. Like, we wanted to gravitate to that level that they have in the language skills that they have. Okay, so that's why I was able to learn the language, and that language was learned by us, by our generation. And then we went to residential school. Every time I came back from residential school in the summertime, I found that I lost my language every time. So the only way to do it, the education system now with the First Nations languages here in Canada has been going on for about 50 years, and they haven't produced one fluent speaker. Okay, and the whole thing is upside down, because originally it was the parents that knew the language, and the kids learned the language from the parents. Okay, but now it's the kids getting the language, and the parents don't know the language at all. So the solution, a language program where it's almost like at a university setting, but on First Nations communities, and have fluent speakers teach the language the way it was taught a long time ago. And then of course, you're going to create an economy for the speakers. And then other people say, hey, wait a minute, these guys are getting paid speaking Ojibway. I want to learn how to speak Ojibway so that I can learn. Okay. This is just a short version that I have on this topic. So, regrets for listening.
And if anyone wants to jump in on that issue with your own experience, and you're welcome to do so. I don't know what we will come back to these questions, and the relation between majority and minority as a solution to rethink that is probably something we can come back on. Ms. David, you have written about the variations of what we call home in the Welsh language and the Gaelic language. Would you establish a link between our relationship to the world and the language we use to name things and feelings?
Here we go. I better not forget this. So now I have my mic. For the last 10 years, for the purpose of researching this book, this very small book, I've really transformed my life because I've been researching medicinal plants. And I've become very passionate about naming them with the words and the names that we have in our own language. And it happens too often, I think, that even in our mother tongue, that we sort of stumble when it comes to these really extraordinary but very specific plant names, bird names, these kinds of things, and then we just pop them in English. And so I've become so incredibly passionate about not doing that. And as a result, I write regularly about basically just nature column, this sort of thing, and the encounter with place. So I think, let's come back to this idea of home. So the word for home in Welsh is cartref. And where I come from, which is sort of slap bang in the middle of North Wales, I would say adre rather than cartref. But if you went further north still, then you would say adra. So you've got adre, adra. Within one language and within 45 minutes in the car. And I feel this word in my body when I say it somewhere around my heart space. It does something to me. And this idea of returning home is so resonant. And in my case, that, you know, it's not like I've been displaced in any way. And there are plenty of people in the world who may well feel a resonance with their own word way more than me because of their personal experience. I have traveled and moved home and lived in other countries by choice, after all. So one of the places I found myself living in was Paris. And I find Paris to be a very difficult city to live in. And then I moved to the forest of Fontainebleau, which was easier. Nonetheless, I found myself being really obsessed with this idea of, and the word, home, cartref. Especially being that in French, in my view, there is no word for home. There's chez soi, chez moi, chez toi, but that for me is about ownership and claiming a place. Whereas home is something other than that, that is felt in the body, and it's that, when you get there. And I couldn't find a way to express myself. I'm going home now, especially when I was going home from France. I'm going home, you know? And it was a word that was coming up frequently, and I just didn't have the right word to express myself. And I just found that to be particularly interesting. In my first novel, I wrote about a man who swims the River Dee in North Wales. And he, in fact, does believe that he owns the River Dee, which is legally not possible in Wales. But he does use this expression, you know, he thinks that he owns it. But when he expands upon that idea, he says that he is the guardian of that river. And that people can own the fishing rights, and people can own the banks of the river and the fields where they might have sheep grazing. But what is the river? And what's the spirit of the river? And that he felt that he was the guardian of that space. And I think within that idea of home is also contained within it is this idea that we care for that place, whether it's water or land or air. And within chez moi, there isn't. I really struggled with it. So I'll come to one of my other languages now, which is Italian. And by chance, I've also used this, I've shoehorned it into the short story that I wrote, commissioned by this festival, which both of us, we were commissioned by the festival to write something about our place in the ecology as humanity. And so I've shoehorned this favorite thing of mine into the short story. We'll be reading those tomorrow. I have one of my characters convey her thoughts, her I suppose her meditation upon this idea that her son comes across when he's in Italy. So dove mi trovo is this expression in Italy. So it doesn't have the concept of home, casa, but dove mi trovo literally means where I find myself. So geographically, I find myself in this room in Montreal. But if you use that expression, it would be way more than that. It would be, I am well in this place. I have found my place in the world. Like, my heart is well. And there's something of the home there as well, isn't there? And then we enter this lovely, really fascinating territory of how language can't always be translated. And all we can do is build this sort of spider's web of connections between them and discussion about the meaning of words, and then let them be. And sometimes that means using a foreign word in your mother tongue. And a memory that I have so clearly fixed in my mind that has moved so many of my creative pieces of writing is being with my brother in Italy when I'd been living in Siena and he was living in Vicenza, and lots of students, all from all over the world. So house rule, everyone speaks Italian. But we spoke Welsh when there was no one else there. And then I didn't see him for some months. I think we next saw each other in Wales for Christmas or something. And the way we spoke to each other in Vicenza, in that apartment, is something that we've never been able to do again. Because it was Welsh peppered with so much Italian that no one else could have entered that conversation. And I think that's what's amazing about language, is that we can even speak a mixture if it's in order to be understood.
Thank you. It's a way of owning the word, the world through the words. Mr. Lewis, the question of memory is at the heart of your work. Would you say that a particular language is a distinctive medium for remembrance, memory, even the way we write history? Do we write history the same way in English and in Welsh, for instance?
Yeah, that was really interesting. I haven't I haven't heard you speak about that before, but it just struck me as well, just sort of incidentally, by the by. We've got different words for going home and to be home as well. To be gartref, and to go gartref, but to be adref. So yeah, I don't know what that signifies, but I'm just trying to collect my thoughts for her. I think it's simpler than I'd like it to be almost, because for me there's no question in terms of cultural collective memory that I access that through the medium of Welsh, and that's fairly simple. The book that I wrote, Flowers of War, is based on, well, trying to reach back to a particular event, which was my grandfather's brother who was killed in the Second World War. And so conversations with my grandparents about their recollections of the Second World War, and sort of my own explorations, trying to find out more about him. And of course, I was never going to speak any other language to my grandparents than Welsh. But sort of in a more, so that's how you access cultural memory for me. But in a broader sense as well, I think there are subtle differences then. Taking something like the Second World War as an example, I think that, you know, in Britain, since leaving the European Union and sort of the past few years with the decline of empire, there's still quite a lot of jingoism and celebration around how the Second World War is remembered. It's this idea of the national pride, if you will, you know, Britain stood alone sort of thing against Nazi Germany, or there's the nostalgia as well, harkening back to when Britain was great and was able to display its greatness on the world stage. And I think in Welsh there's a different narrative that you can only, well, for me, it's much more easy to find that narrative through the medium of Welsh. In terms of the poetry that was written in the wake of the First and the Second World War, there was a lot of, you know, the poetry that was written on memorial stones, on graves. There's a couple of dysgu'r ffordd o ddwysg o ffau, yr rhwyg o golli'r hogiau. So the rhwyg, the sort of the rip, if you will, or the tear that happened when we lost the boys. And there's this sort of counter-narrative then that our boys in Wales were sent to fight a war that, you know, especially with the First World War, that wasn't really, that they had no business being there. So there's a different narrative that you can access through a different language. And also I've been thinking, again, significance and the subtle differences in words. You've got the word cofio, to remember, but you've also got the one I used just there, the ddwysg o ffau. So that's sort of nearer to memorialize, I think. And I think there's something slightly more somber, some more somber connotations. But I was, trying to think of concrete sort of examples. I think hymns are really interesting in the Welsh language context. So a non-conformist Protestant tradition. And from the 18th century onwards and the 19th century, you have, I suppose, the main form of literary expression in Welsh during that period is through writing hymns. And they are very often quite personal, quite intense, and almost, dare I say it, you know, it sounds weird to say it, but there's something almost erotic about some of them. This expression of love. There's something very carnal about it, even though they are, you know, hymns to God. And this is something that's been passed on to our generation because through the sort of the chapel-going tradition. And again, thinking of my grandparents, they were big chapel-goers. Their whole social life revolved around the chapel and its activities. And so when I hear hymns being sung, when I sing them myself, it's a way of making that contact with the past and inheriting that significance. But it's funny how that's changed with the society becoming more secular. Obviously, no one much goes to chapel anymore in Wales, but hymns have remained really important, and people join choirs and they sing hymns. People go to sporting events and the pubs. Yeah. So this is like a big sort of collective cultural thing that people will still do. They will get roaring drunk in pubs and they will sing hymns and they'll know all the words. You know, and they're singing about God and how much I love God. They don't, they've never set foot in a chapel since they were 5 years old, but this is still a massive thing. And it's a really emotive thing still. People will be in tears singing these songs. So I think there's something really fascinating there. And I write about that a bit in the book, where I went to chapel one evening and I sang this hymn, and I didn't really know it. You sort of hum along and you pick up the tune, and by the end I just had to leave because I was in tears, and I really didn't know why. I didn't know much about this hymn. I'd probably heard it once or twice before. It wasn't like one of my favorite. People have favorite hymns as well. That's another thing. This wasn't one of my favorite hymns or anything like that. But I just couldn't understand why it had had such an emotional effect on me. But it was only later that I realised that this particular hymn had been sung in the funerals of each of my grandfather's siblings. And I just thought, that's so weird. It's probably, nothing, but it's so weird that had that emotional force on me. Just as a footnote, sort of, again, in a more general sense, historically speaking, that would have been we had professional poets in Wales back in the Middle Ages, and that would have been their primary role. Yeah. So you don't have narrative poetry in Welsh really up until the modern era. Narrative happens through the medium of prose. The main functions of poetry traditionally in Welsh have been praise and elegy. And so this idea, I think, that you employ someone to produce words, to produce language that have almost a sort of incantatory power almost at the death of someone important or someone beloved, I think is significant in and of itself and worthy of mention. And I think some of that, even though we don't have many professional poets these days. You can't really make a living of being a poet in modern Wales, but it's still there, this idea that, when someone dies or when someone gets married or when someone's born, they want a poem, basically, to commemorate that event. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Mr. Carrion, if I'm correct, your family is from Andalusia, and you write mostly, if not exclusively, in Castilian. But would you say that living in a city where another language is widely spoken, Catalan, and knowing that language has an impact on the way you write? Does it change the way you write, even in Castilian?
Yes, for sure. Worse? No. I am absolutely bilingual in my life, and I think that the history is interesting because my parents are from Andalusia in the south of Spain, Granada and Córdoba. They emigrate when they were like teenagers, and they never spoke Catalan. They never learned Catalan, but they can watch television and listen to radio. And it was during Franco dictatorship when Catalan was forbidden, was a problem to speak and to learn and to live in Catalan. And also there are some theories that Franco was interested in this kind of emigration in order to put millions of people, Castilian speakers, in Catalonia and Basque Country. Then my parents met in Barcelona and fall in love, and I am like the product of this kind of invasion of the Catalan country by people from other parts of Spain. But when I was born in democracy, there was a program, very important program, political program, called normalization of Catalan language, and it was very successful. Only in 10 years, Catalan was a very powerful language with a lot of books published in Catalan, with television in Catalan, radios. And now it's very interesting because it's also very successful in terms of cultural and social integration, because anyone who arrives to Catalonia from Asia, from Latin America, from Africa, the kids, the children go to the public school, and in 1, 2, 3 years they speak very well Catalan, and then this is a very good tool for integration. And in that way is a beautiful program, very good politics. On the other hand, when I was a child, my name is Jorge. My parents gave me the name of Jorge. But in the school, in the 80s, I was suddenly Jordi, because there was this spirit of normalization, and they changed my name with no permission, you know. And then it was like they were doing some things that Franco was doing with them 20 years ago, before, no? This is why I feel a kind of contradiction between my two nationalities, or my two cultures, or my two languages. I spoke fluently in Catalan. My first love, 16 years old, was a relationship in Catalan. But I have, sometimes contradictions, especially during the last years with this Catalan process and the problems between Spain and Catalonia. And for, 15 years, I felt more Jordi. Actually, when I had to open my first email address, I opened jordicarrion@hotmail.com. But now I feel more Jorge. Then I think that is in my books. Actually, I have a book about Australia. I went to Australia to interview my family that were immigrants in Australia. And in the book, some people call me Jordi, some people call me Jorge, and some people, a couple of people call me George, because I like this idea of mutation, identity mutation. And also I have this novel, The Dead, that is about the people that died in the fiction. When you are reading a book or watching a movie or playing a video game, the character that dies in the fiction appears in that wall called the Wall of the Dead. And I thought it was, science fiction, very fantastic, different from the real world and the autobiographical experience. But a friend of mine tell me that not, because one character is at the beginning of the book called Roy, and later is called Michael. No? Then I have always this subject about mutation of the identity in all my books. But for today, I was thinking in my book translated to English, bookshops, there is a chapter in bookshops about Barcelona, about my city. And the last week I was reading again the chapter, and I discovered that I didn't mention that in all the bookshops in Barcelona, we have a lot of books in Spanish, a lot of books in Catalan. It's very normal. There are no sections like Catalan and Spanish. Everything is mixed. For me, it's so normal that I didn't mention in bookshops. And it's beautiful to live in a city where you have two different cultures, very integrated and mixed and living together.
Very, very interesting, and for us in Montreal, maybe something to think about. Alors, je vous remercie pour ces réflexions. Je vous propose maintenant d'entendre un peu de ces différentes langues que nous avons évoquées, en proposant à nos intervenants de lire un extrait de texte dans la langue dont il est question, donc, ou de parler librement dans la langue. Donc, we'll start with Ojibway. So you can also tell us a bit about the characteristics of the language you'll be speaking, and to make us well aware of its specificity. So
Okay.
we'll start with Ojibway.
Ojibway. Just to let you know, this is pronounced Ake-wenze. Okay? And I'm going to ask everybody to repeat after me. Ake,
Ake,
wen,
wen,
ze.
ze,
Okay, Ake-wenze.
ake, wenze.
Yeah, oh, you guys sound Ojibway already.
Teacher, we have the best teacher.
A person as worthy as the earth. And I've heard it pronounced in Welsh, I think. It sounded like Welsh. So the pronunciations. Okay. I wrote this book because a friend of mine wanted to know more about my story. And so I said, yeah, okay, I'll write a book about it. So this is the result of it. I'm going to, in the Ojibway language, we always introduce ourselves. Okay, it's basically a traditional introduction. It goes like this, bonjour. A lot of people say, you got that from a foreigner. And I said, oh, Gavin. I said, no. So the French got it from us. So, bonjour, Eli Baxter, Llenyddiaeth, King Donjiba, Atiknitoram. Now, when I say Llenyddiaeth, I say my name is, okay? But going deeper to it, it comes from the word Llenyddiaeth, okay? And Llenyddiaeth means what my purpose is and what I'm going to do in my life. Because historically, traditionally, when a child is born, their spirit birds bring them from the spirit world into the physical world. When I was born, October 25th, 1954, way up in northern Ontario, the loons came and landed on the lake where my parents were. And it was unusual to have loons land, especially that late in the wintertime, because they're supposed to have been down south. Okay, so they landed, they heard my crying, and then they left because they knew that I had arrived. Okay, so they got rid of me. We're not responsible anymore for this guy. And then we're supposed to have gotten their spirit names. Okay, but I use Eli Baxter because my dad and my mom didn't do the ceremony when we were a child. Okay. And the reason for that is they did that to protect us so that we wouldn't do anything cultural or say anything in the language when we went to residential school. Okay, so if you take a look at all the English names of all Anishinaabe way up north, you know, they're mostly biblical. You know, Eli, John, George, all those. Is there a George in the Bible? Well, anyway. So that's where Llenyddiaeth comes from. Llenyddiaeth, my purpose in life. So that was because a long time ago, we had runners. A chief in one village would want to have a meeting somewhere in the summertime. So in order to do that, they would have runners going in all the different communities that they want to have a meeting at a certain place at a certain time. So they had runners going all over the place. Okay, and all these runners were mostly orators from from the village, and they would. But before they go to the village, into a different village, they couldn't run right into the village and say, I'm so and so, I have a message and stuff like that, and then get out of there. Okay, but they had to do what they call a song by the edge of the woods. Okay, and the song by the edge of the woods is the messenger sits down, takes his drums out, his pipes, tobacco and stuff like that, and starts singing. The village would notice that because the dogs would bark and stuff like that, and say, "Oh, we have a messenger." So the messenger, so the chief would be told, and the chief would get 3 dignitaries to say, "Okay, go and meet this guy. You know, what's the message?" So that is But when he introduced himself to those people at the fire, and then when he's escorted into the village, he would say his name, where he's from, and what his clan is. And the purpose for that was everybody would know, okay, this is his Anishinaabe name. That means this is his purpose in life. The reason he's alive. Okay, basically. And then where he comes from. And then the people know, oh yeah, okay, we know the history. We would know the chief and all the chiefs that had been there before. And they would know, some family members or anything like that from the village where this messenger came from. So that's why he would say where he came from. Plus, the people will know what spirits lived on that land. And also that they would know the history of the spirits of the land, spirits of the land, the water, and the air. So that's why they introduced the place where they came from. And the last thing they would know, the introduction would be was his clan. Okay, let's say I'm a Caribou clan. That means my responsibility is to help the village with education and all the health care or whatever. Everybody has food, so that was our responsibility as a Tik. And there's all the other clans that had all different responsibilities and roles.
We could do 3 hours just with the native languages,
so I'll just do that for now.
But we'll listen a bit of Welsh and Catalan, and we'll try to have a few minutes for questions. But so we want to hear some Welsh with Ms. David to start with.
Diolch, thank you. I will read a short paragraph in Welsh just so that you get into the music of the language. And then I'll read the very, very, very short chapter in English, which has Welsh in it and has Italian in it. And I should tell you in advance, one word appears, which is ferma. And the word for farm in Welsh is ferm. The word for farm in Italian, for this character from the north in the North Veneto, would have been contadin. But the glories of research means that I also know that there was this made-up word. So the word for farm in Welsh, ferm, was made into an Italian-sounding word among the prisoners of war, and so they referred to a farm as ferma. Neuaddau gweigion oedd ein ffermdau. Pryn ond solet oedd y dodrefn. Maen ond solet oedd y Cymru, anwyl proprio. Byddai digon o le i ddawnsio os mae dyna o'n i'n ffansio wneud. Ond doedd Cymru ddim yn ffansi giamogs fel na fel arfer. Llefydd cwrdd, eistedd a sgwrsio oedd ei ffermdau. Ffilo heb ffilo. Anodd ydi deud stori lawn heb eiriau. Ond, fe ddaeth straeon hefyd, efo stimiau a llygaid dwl. Straeon caru oedd y Cymru yn ei hoffi, ond ddim rei rhy gnawdol. Golau canwyll, golau paraffin, nosweithiau hir a rhywun wastad yn brwydro beicio i ba fferma bynnag oedd yn gwneud cucina Italiana, ni a'r Cymru ar nos Sul. So I'll turn to English now. Ffilo is a gathering to tell stories, by the way. Their farmhouses were empty halls. Furniture was scant. The Welsh were spindly but a solid bunch. Cari, all of them to us, proprio cari. There would have been enough space to dance, had they wanted, but the Welsh didn't fancy antics like that usually. Their homes were meeting places for sitting, chatting. Ffilo without the ffilo. It's really difficult to tell the full story from start to finish without words. But some came with hand gestures and silly eyes. Love stories, that's what they wanted, the Welsh, but not if they were too sensual. We had candlelight, we had paraffin light, long nights, and someone always putting in a Herculean effort to bike to whatever ferma or other was doing a cucina Italiana, us and the Welsh on a Sunday night. We'd sometimes leave one summer's evening and return to our post in winter. Rain, hail, it was all nothing to us. The Romans managed, didn't they? And we'd have put up with anything if it meant reaching our destination that night and being liked, just a little. Damp air was nothing then. The dinner was better if Elmo got hold of the wooden spoon and if we had plenty of oil. We'd make enough pasta for everyone, con salvia e olio. Fry the salvia crisp and watch the Welsh roll their eyes when we used olio as food instead of medicine. We'd use some of the leaves if salvia wasn't to be had. Our barely anything meals. Nonna had taught me when I was 9 years old. Then, there I was, making it and running Welsh sentences through my mind. Dwi'n coginio. No, not like that. Dwi'n coginio. Eccolo, I'm cooking pasta with qualcosa, cavolo, come si dice. So much of my Welsh is escaping me. Dwi'n coginio, I'm cooking pasta. I have no problem saying that. But the saucepan first had hot water in it, boiling with a little salt. Hot water. Gwyneth once shouted that at me and saved me from a scolding. How could I forget? She was always between me and disaster. Dŵr poeth. That was it, dŵr poeth. You see, it's coming back. And so, while I waited for the water to boil in a Welsh kitchen, we'd start the ffilo and then just not stop. Boss Evan would ask me to tell the one story about the man in the ditch. Fos in Welsh, and fosso for us. Welsh and Italian are surprisingly similar sometimes, especially about the big things in life. We all end our lives in a fosso, whether after a guerra or after peace. Boss Evan told us about some girl who walked miles without shoes to buy a Bible. Not to buy shoes, but a Bible. She had strange priorities. Even a good Italiano would get shoes first. Quite a few of us had stolen shoes off the dead body of a poorer soul than us. Then we'd exchange one of our own stories for his. Nobody remembered whose story it was by then. Our story, simply, right? Us, all of us, together. You can't own a story more than you can own a man, right? Non importa. We were glad enough that someone somewhere remembered the various bits to build the story whole each time. This is how it went. Ecco, a tale of a shepherd one of us had known. He would take his cows up the Prealpi to graze, spring and summer. In other versions, he went to the Dolomiti. The townspeople thought it was the life of some sort of hermit. So when this shepherd finally died, that's where his neighbours were, mouths agape, tutti stupidi, like cows, every last one of them shocked to see anyone else but them at the funeral, let alone a crowd. Many had come from Belluno, the other side of the mountain. Somehow, he had known a lot of people after all. Allora, a mountain doesn't separate people, it unites. Una storia bella? Appunto. Bella, Boss Evan said, but not Trevor. It took a little bit more time to persuade him that we were not going to poison his tea. But he had half a smile, and we looked to their mountains and thought of Belluno on the other side. Anything was possible. We were lost, somewhere in our story world. We wanted to be them, the Welsh, and they lived through our stories. Memory is picky, but the bad things didn't come near us when we were there, nor the grief of the world. Simple. We talked nonsense, we whispered, we laughed like mules.
Thank you very much. And now we'll hear a poem in Welsh. Mr. Lewis.
I'll try to be as brief as I can, but just to explain really quickly, it's a poem about the little narrow roads that you get just on the farthest edge of the Welsh coast in the west, going down to these little coves and towns and villages there, and they're just a nightmare to try and drive through if you're a tourist from further abroad or from Cardiff as I was. But then if you look at it from the local people's perspective, they're as broad as they want them to be, basically. And it's written in Cynghanedd, which is directly translated as something, I suppose, like harmony. So this is a metrical system that its characteristics have been part of Welsh poetry since the beginning, but the rules sort of solidified somewhere around the 15th century, and those are still the metrical rules that I would follow now, writing Cynghanedd. So it's quite a complex system of assonance, alliteration, and internal rhyme. So hopefully it'll be interesting to listen to. But I've just realised that, yeah, it's quite sort of, the way that I write sometimes is full of little English words as well. So look out for 4x4, Armageddon, and I've made a little verb out of reversing as well. So keep your ears peeled for them. Okay. Lonydd Cilion. Hawdd meddwl, a'i ceir nhw'n bwlion dalog hyd hawl ei holwynion 4x4, ac ar ei ffôn, gadwch i'r Armageddon ddigwydd. Wrth iddyn ddigio ar ei hwt, mynd i wrych, refersio, os deiau'r dreng ddistriw dro gnawn well lôn, ail gynllunio. Ond mynnu gweld mam hen hen gar, Geia a'i gawell o alar yn dŵad bob yn deiar I hel tai hyd y coltar. Bryd hynny, a bryd henwr ydw i'n gweld nad yw'n gul i'r sgotwr. Lôn lydan, wel hen wladwr addfwyn, yn dirwyn i'r dŵr. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You will notice that Mr. Carion will read from his new graphic novel, so that we will have images projected during his readings. So.
Yes, my last book is a graphic novel. I wrote a script. Can we put the... Okay. I had written the script, and I have done the version in Spanish and in Catalan. And in Catalan is my name's Jordi, and it's called El Museo, the museum, and it's a graphic novel of the National Museum of Catalan Art in Barcelona, and it's a kind of the catalog of the museum, but in bande dessinée, in comic book, and not in only with text and photos. I'm going only to read that pages and to explain a little, because we don't have a lot of time. explica el mite que Prometeu va viatjar fins a les altures del món Olimp per a robar el foc als déus i donar-los als humans. Però la veritat és que va ocórrer exactament a l'inrevés. Els éssers humans, al voltant d'una foguera, van crear els déus, els van atorgar la guspira, la flama, el poder de l'incendi. In the first part, I tell the myth of Prometheus that it said that stole the fire in Mount Olympus from the gods to give the fire to the mankind. And I said, but it's not true because it was the opposite. The human beings around the fire, they created the gods. No, they invented the gods. No? And this is the following page with the representation of this idea. And it's just the history of the museum, the history of Catalonia, the history of the art from the Romanic style until now. And some parts are essay and history. The artist is called Sagar, a very good artist. And there are some times that we don't do this kind of essay, but interviews with people like Vargas, that is the head of security of the museum, and he shows us a lot of places that are not allowed to the general public. And then I only want to show you the second interview because it's amazing. It's a woman called Rousset, and Rousset used to work in the museum, but now he cannot watch anymore. He was losing la vista, the sight. Then we represented all the chapter from her point of view, and she's talking about how it was to work in the museum and then to lose the sight. And then in the moment when she explains me what happened to her, we change the style and we do the same trip around the museum, but without words and only with images.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope it gives you an idea of all these languages and that you will buy the books of our authors. Thanks our panelists. It was a wonderful time. It was too short, but thank you very much.